Dear students, in this session we are beginning from page number 130, paragraph number 2. In this paragraph, Peter Barry makes us aware of the fourth characteristic feature of postcolonial criticism. And what is that? The stress on cross-cultural interactions. That is the fourth characteristic of postcolonial criticism. An awareness on or the importance given to what is cross-cultural interactions. Different cultures are getting mingled, especially which cultures? The culture of the colonizer and the culture of the colonized. Both of these cultures are getting mingled in the post-colonial scenario. The post-colonial literatures are addressing this cross-cultural interactions, and it is brought through the examples of W.B. Yeats, Chinua Achebe, etc. Let us see what is there in the paragraph. At one level, Achebe's use of a village Africa corresponds to Yeats' evocation of a pre-colonial mythological Ireland of heroes and heroines. So here a comparison is made between W.B. Yeats and Chinua Achebe. These two writers, they are talking about their native lands. Achebe is talking about an African village and W.B. Yeats is talking about a province in Ireland. Both these authors, they evoke a pre-colonial mythological past of their land. At another level, the double or hybrid identity is precisely what the post-colonial situation brings into being. The shift in attitudes in the 1980s and 1990s was towards post-colonial writers seeing themselves as using primarily African or Asian forms, supplemented with European-derived influences, rather than as working primarily within European genres like the novel and merely adding to them a degree of exotic Africanization. All post-colonial literatures, it might be said, seem to make this transition. So here we understand that post-colonial reading of the different texts, especially the texts of W.B. Yeats and also Chinua Achebe, make us understand a necessary transition that the writers make. And what is it? These writers, they tend to use the European derived influences in their text. They cannot just talk about their indigenous land or their native cultures without being influenced by their colonizers. They are actually incorporating the European structures in their writings, in their novels or in their poems, and through those structures they are slowly bringing their own cultures also evident and known to the whole world. So this kind of transition, it happens in the writings of the post-colonial writers. That is what Peter Barry talks here. I will repeat that. The shift in attitudes in the 1980s and 1990s was towards post-colonial writers seeing themselves as using primarily African or Asian forms supplemented with European-derived influences. rather than as working primarily within European genres like the novel and merely adding to them a degree of exotic Africanization. All postcolonial literatures, underline, all postcolonial literatures, it might be said, seem to make this transition. And from here onwards, he is giving the different phases of this cross-cultural interactions in the text. There are different phases in the writing of literature by the postcolonial writers. And Peter Barry very beautifully brings that different phases in his work. They begin with an unquestioning acceptance of the authority of European models, especially in the novel, and with the ambition of writing works that will be masterpieces entirely in this tradition. This can be called the adopt phase of colonial literature, since the writer's ambition is to adopt the form as it stands, the assumption being that it has universal validity. So this is the first phase in the writing of the postcolonial writers. What is it? It is the phase of unquestioning acceptance. What do they accept? They accept the authority of the European models and also the European genres like novels. They begin with an unquestioning acceptance of the authority of European models and with the ambition of writing works that will be masterpieces entirely in this tradition. These writers, they are not altogether rejecting the style of the Europeans or the colonizers. They are starting their writing in the style of the European works. This can be called the adopt phase of colonial literature, because the writer's ambition is to adopt or to accept the form as it stands, the assumption being that it has universal validity. So if a postcolonial writer has to begin his writing, he has to adopt a universally accepted style, and that universally accepted style is brought by the colonizers, the Europeans. So the postcolonial writer adopts that authority of the Eurocentric style and he begins writing in that style. So that is the first phase of his writing, and that phase is called the adopt phase of colonial literature. And now we are moving to the next phase. The second stage can be called the adapt phase, since it aims to adapt the European form to African subject matter, thus assuming partial rights of intervention in the genre. So in the second phase, they are slowly trying to incorporate the native culture to the accepted universal form of writing. The second stage can be called the adapt phase. They are trying to make one with the accepted Eurocentric culture. It aims to adapt the European form to African subject matter. African in the sense, the subject matter of the colonies, thus assuming partial rights of intervention in the genre. So in the second phase, they are not fully accepting the European structure or European style. they are slowly merging it with the style and ideas of the colony or of the colonized. So this phase is called the adapt phase. In the final phase, there is, so to speak, a declaration of cultural independence, whereby African writers remake the form to their own specification without reference to European norms. And there is another phase, a phase where there is immense freedom and liberation. And this is the third phase, and it is called the adept phase. And what is happening in that phase? A declaration of cultural independence, whereby African writers remake the form to their own specification. Now they are rebuilding or remaking their own native styles, and now they are totally discarding the European styles. It is a declaration of cultural independence without reference to European norms. This might be called the adept phase, since its characteristic is the assumption that the colonial writer is an independent adept in the form, not a humble apprentice as in the first phase, or a mere licensee as in the second. So this is the difference that we see in the adept phase. In the adept phase, he is becoming a skillful writer, an independent, skillful writer. There he is not at all an apprentice, as we see in the adopt phase. He is not at all as a licensee, as we see in the adapt phase. And now he is in the adept phase. He is a very skillful, independent writer. And these are the different stages that we see in the writings of the post-colonial writers. This stress on cross-cultural interactions is a fourth characteristic of post-colonialist criticism. When we look through these phases, we understand that there are some cultural mingling, cross-cultural interactions are happening. The cultures of the colonized and the cultures of the colonizer, they are getting mingled in the writings of the post-colonial writers. And that is a fact. It happens because everything happens through a period of transition. We cannot find watertight compartments or strict breaks, as from this year onwards it is solely post-colonial criticism, and likewise. So these cross-cultural interactions are one of the important characteristic feature of post-colonial criticism. So we have seen 4 important characteristic features of post-colonial criticism. The first one was an awareness of the representation of the non-European as the exotic or immoral other. The second characteristic feature was the concern of language. Language itself is the second concern of post-colonial criticism. The third characteristic feature of post-colonial approach is the emphasis on identity as doubled, hybrid, or unstable. And now the fourth characteristic feature of post-colonialist criticism is the cross-cultural interactions. I wind up this session here. We will continue the chapter in the coming sessions. Thank you.